And I invite you to think about, as we go through today, what is your grade 1 back row don't sing story? So just by a show of hands, how many people have a story from their past, grade school, middle school, universities, college, or faith communities? And it's quite interesting, Brene, in her latest release of her research and her update called Dare to Lead, just last week, she has given away to K to 12 classrooms around the world her curriculum on Dare to Lead free, as well as lesson plans. And like Brene's organization, it is a work in progress. So they released it, and 2 weeks later, they took it back, feeling a little shame, I believe, because they hadn't really thought enough about how to embed it in the culture of the classrooms where shame is so prevalent. So they've taken the curriculum back this week to update it and try to beef up, in particular, the parts around shame. And I think that when we can embrace that we all make mistakes, how do we not shame ourselves, but learn and grow from them? And I think we all need to be a little braver. So this is me meeting Brene and falling in love with her about 5.5 years ago. I stalked her, as many of you know, for a long time. And I've had the honor of being a facilitator and one of her consultants for about 5 years now, 5.5 years. And I really enjoy her work. I enjoy her intention around sharing it around the world. And perhaps like many of you, I want to be able to make sure that it's done in a very ethical way. And in her latest research, she talked about, how do we make organizations better? And so as we talk about that today and the impact that has on the people that you coach and supervise, I want you to think about where's a place that you need to step into that is your call of courage. I think we all have them, whether it's, not getting into a parallel process with our clients, or whether it's stepping into our own arena, expanding our business into a new area of, speaking or keynoting or facilitation. And with Brene's latest research, she talked about, and here was her research question, and I'll make these slides available, by the way, at the end of today, so you don't have to write like the devil. What, if anything, about the way people are leading today needs to change in order for leaders to be successful in a complex, rapidly changing environment where we're faced with seemingly intractable challenges and an insatiable demand for innovation? And so those of you who know her, she's no lightweight. She's got 400,000 pieces of data and 5 bestsellers. This research, though, particularly was done with 150 global C-level leaders on the future of leadership. And when asking that question, people got really stumped. And she said it was easier for her to ask these leaders the question of what happens in the absence of courageous leaders. And the research all boiled down to this one answer: we need braver leaders, and we need more courageous cultures. And if you're like me in the work I do with my coaching clients, this is prevalent. For people to coach their clients to be braver in cultures that perhaps do not embody courageousness, do not appreciate courageousness, and invite people to play small rather than large. The boiling down of the problems that Brene identified in this, and I'm going to ask you to do a small breakout. Oh, I think we have some background noise there. There's somebody not muted. Sylvia, I think I'm getting a little feedback perhaps from you. If you could.
How do I mute?
There you go. Thank you. So I'm going to just walk through these 10 topics briefly, and then I'm going to invite you into a breakout room for just about 5 to 7 minutes to think about where do you see these workplace problems or barriers to courage showing up in the clients that you work with. Not surprisingly, the number one was we avoid tough conversations. We'd rather speak about people than speak to people. Certainly, I've seen that in many cultures I work with. I spend, I think, at least 50% of the work I do is helping people to step into that, lean into the discomfort of how to have the courageous conversation and not to shrink back from it. Because we don't have those conversations, we spend unreasonable time managing problematic behaviors. So how do we manage the performance of those people who we've perhaps not been clear with, haven't had the courageous conversations with? We experience diminished trust by lack of connection and empathy. And, in my work, I still find there are some cultures that feel that, if they're showing empathy or emotional intelligence at all, that's a bad thing, that, they can't lean into vulnerability. I had one client say to me, Lori, if I start being empathetic, people will take advantage of me. And I said to this person, I've seen your 360 feedback. I've talked to your team. Trust me, you could turn the dial a long way on empathy, and nobody would think that you are a pushover in your life. However, people are brought up. We brought up the stories that we've been brought up in. We don't take smart risks or bold ideas to meet innovative needs. And of course, if we don't have cultures that allow people to not be perfect, we end up with Lily, are you hearing a lot of feedback there?
Yep, I'm scanning to see what it is. Hang on.
Okay, thank you, Lily. We don't take smart risks or bold ideas to meet innovative needs. And of course, in cultures where people are not allowed to, play with ideas, to come with ideas that are not perfect. If you've ever read any of the research that Google did,
Dr. Michael Morale.
Yes.
Thank you. So when cultures do not allow people to step into and not have ideas that are fully formed, people do not come forward with innovative ideas because they're afraid of being shamed. And as you know, Google did the research in 2015 with the top 200 teams that were their highest performing. And the number one thing they found was psychological safety allowed people to put forward those ideas. We get stuck by setbacks and failures instead of changing processes, because changing processes can upset people. And when we upset people, we have to have those courageous conversations. We shame and blame versus having accountability conversations with people, having clear expectations, having healthy boundaries. We opt out of vital conversations around diversity and inclusion due to fear. That fear can be many reasons. It can be fear of not doing it correctly, fear of the consequence of raising issues, fear of the cultures of the organizations that we work in. We rush to unsustainable solutions versus really digging in and doing problem identification. And that can be because if people have to own up that things need to change or it takes too much time, it's easier just to say, let's just push on. We have gauzy aspirational values. So we say, everybody's voice counts, and yet we shut people down. And it's not safe to say, wait a minute, I felt shut down in that meeting. I need to understand, tell me what was going on for you. And that we don't learn and grow due to trying to be perfect, and we fear not being perfect. How many people can relate to some of those issues, either in the clients you work with, the work you do directly with organizations? So what I'd like to do, I think 5 minutes, Lily, just because I know you'll need a bit of time at the end. I'm going to suggest that perhaps you take a snapshot of these 10, unless you have a fabulous memory with your phone. And I'm going to ask Lily to put you into breakup groups of maybe just 2 or 3 or 4, whatever works for the 5 minutes, and just have a conversation around which of these do you see, and in particular, what impact does that have on you doing the work or the clients that you're coaching or supervising?
Okay, so I'm making 9 rooms. There's 46 people. 46. Whatever that is, it's random. So 7 minutes, did you say? 6?
Yes, 7 would be great.
7, and so at 6 minutes, I will hit the button and you'll come back automatically in 1 minute time. So when you get a message, it'll say click on to accept, and it'll put you into a room. Here we go. 6, 7 minutes.
and to have to challenge someone could feel like not being nice or be viewed as not being nice.
Yes, I call it my good girl syndrome, Marilyn.
Yes.
What I'd like to share is what we partly talked about, actually quite a lot really, about the parallel process point. So we can feel quite quickly with somebody who's afraid, a bit afraid ourselves. And what are we afraid of? Not being good enough. We might be shamed. And I think our challenge is to say, do you know what? I'm feeling this at the moment. How about you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks, Fiona. You can sure see how the seven-eyed model plays out, whether it's the organizational piece that Carrie mentioned, you know, yeah, it's huge for sure.
I
think sorry, go ahead, John.
We have an international group, and we just started to talk about how, even though we all experienced the tough conversation issue, how that plays out differently in different cultures. The different ways we avoid the tough conversations.
Fascinating, Jonathan. I'd love to have been in that group. So I think for the sake of time, I'm going to move us along. Thanks, folks, for weighing in. I don't think this is a conversation that's going to stop after today for sure. So one of the things I think that's fascinating is this really speaks to I-7 in supervision, you know, that organizational context. And Brene often talks about stepping into the arena. And I love that metaphor. When do I need to step in? When do I sometimes need to step back? I'm often not aware when I need to step back. I know when I need to step in, but sometimes it's actually not my conversation to have. And so anyway, there's the cheap seats in organizations, and those are the ones, you know, we call those the Twitter thugs, that when you're going out on a limb to do something courageous or your clients are doing it, people hurl the judgments at you, and it's super easy. You know, we often say in this work, if you're not also stepping into that courage arena with me, actually your opinions don't count to me. So basically, I'm not listening to you anymore. The box seats are like the box seats in any kind of a show or concert you go to. These are the seats that are, you know, the prime seats. They have the soft cushions, and you get maybe appetizers and wine or other lovely things delivered to you. And the box seats are the seats that are made by those who have the power in organizations. And we talked about that. Janet brought that up in our small group. And when the people have the power, of course, that is also a ticket to being the people who can cause shame, because we built this. And if you don't look like us, sound like us, talk like us, then you're not one of us. So it becomes an us, them, or power over. The season ticket holders are just the seats of, we call them the seats of comfort and joy, the support section, that we need to have both of these in our lives. And the support section really is the section of empathy and self-compassion. And I think that's a lot of what our clients come to us for. They come to us to have that safe place to reflect on their work, to be able to talk through their shame, which is why supervisors also need supervisors, because we pick that up, as Fiona said, in parallel processing, or we come out of a call and we think, jeepers, I don't think I was on my game today. I'm sure this isn't just me. You know, I feel like I really needed to support somebody better in that call. I missed something. And so the support section is what we get from others that says, hey, you're okay, you are enough. And we are all a work in progress. And, you know, in this work, we say that shame, it grows like in a petri dish. It loves secrecy, silence, and judgment. And the more of that it gets, the more of that it grows quietly. So the more we have empathy in our lives to have that, you know, the shame buddy that we can talk to, the more we dilute the impact that the shame can have on us as people and for our clients as well. So that every organization has these seats in it. And I think our role is to help our clients and ourselves to know when these seats cause us to lose our power. In discussing these organizational problems, Brene came up with a metaphor that I really like. She calls them termites in the walls. And I've never had termites. I've never lived in a country that has them, but maybe you do. But you know, I understand that termites kind of grow. They're invisible, and they grow in the walls, and they keep eating away at the fiber of the walls until all of a sudden things start to collapse. Foundations get weak, the walls get weak. And I think this is very similar with some of the organizational cultures we work in. You know, I think about when organizations won't get poor responses to their employee engagement feedback, or when people are unwilling to have exit interviews, or when people don't put their ideas on the table. It's because the termites of shame are living there. And it's really hard, I think, for people to voice that, because The further up the organization you go, I sometimes call it the CEO disease. You're out of touch with reality. It's sometimes the people right down at the grassroots levels that are also feeling perhaps some of the shame of having, to work with their clients in a way where they're not providing that level of service. So it can be an epidemic. I was on a call with the wonderful Karen Pratt last week on the Global Supervisors Network, and I just thought this was, again, such a great reminder of how can we and our clients stay in that okay box from a TA perspective when we feel shame and we move into that more reactive modes. It's pretty hard to stay in our game as well and be in the here and now. And as you said, feeling it to be vulnerable and say, hey, I'm also feeling something here. What are you feeling? How can I support you in this way going forward? And so I think it's a really important thing for supervisors to be able to pick up on that, whether we're working face to face or more virtually. How do we support people to be able to not be in a reactive mode or an ego state, but to actually come at their conversations from that adult here and now premise? And so again, as I said, the empathy is the antidote to shame, and self-compassion means speaking to ourselves like we would to a good friend. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the wonderful work on self-compassion by Kristen Neff, N-E-F-F. She's done a lot of excellent work in this area, and she talks about how people are so much more kind to their friends. So if one of your coaching clients, if you consider them friends, or one of your buddies, you're having a conversation, they say, wow, I just feel like I'm not in my good space right now, or I didn't do something I'm really proud of. You can have that conversation, say, hey, I've been there, I understand, I get it, or gee, that just really sounds hard for you. All the things that we learn in great empathetic responses. And yet when we do that ourselves, the first thing we think about, oh, I'm such an idiot. How could I have done that? Right? I see some people laughing at that comment, so I'm sure that you can relate to that. So I want to move a bit into what, the shame piece, because I want to talk about, again, how it connects to our work. But in Brené's work, she defines shame this way, and it's different perhaps than some of the others. But shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. And when it comes to the shame research, what Brené found, she said all researchers will agree that shame and guilt are quite different. And in our work, we call this the shame 1, 2, 3s, and we always start with this. And I want to make sure I have it word for word. So shame, number one is, we all have it. And shame is universal and one of the most primitive human emotions that we can experience. And Brené's direct quote is, the only people who don't experience shame are those who lack the capacity for empathy and human connection. So here's your choice. Fess up to experiencing shame in your life or admit that you're a sociopath. Quick note, this is the only time that shame seems like a good option. Number two is that we're all afraid to speak about shame. Even the word shame, if you think about shame on you, which many parents would use very easily with their children, brings us back to that shame on you kind of conversation. And then number three, the less we talk about shame, the more control it has over our lives. So it does take things like vulnerability. It takes things like good emotional literacy. It takes things like understanding the things that make us great or small, because we're hardwired for things like, connection, love, and belonging. It's why we're here, and it's what gives purpose and meaning to us. So when it comes to shame versus guilt, of course, there are 4 affects that Brené found in her work. Shame is I am bad, so I take a shot at my own self-efficacy. I'm stupid, I'm dumb, whatever the words are that come through. I'm not enough, I'm inadequate. Whereas guilt is I've done something bad or something that I'm not proud of. And guilt is better than shame because guilt is behavior that we can actually shift. So if I came out of a coaching conversation with one of my clients and I feel somehow guilty that I hadn't done my best, that's a fantastic time for me to go to my supervisor. And through my conversation, my reflection, those fabulous quiet moments I spend, I'm able to start to make sense of that. I'm able to learn. I'm able to start to, forgive myself for not being perfect. The third affective behavior is humiliation. And humiliation sounds like shame. It's often felt the same way. We often feel shame in our bodies, whether it's, heated cheeks or something in your stomach or, tingly armpits or, clenched back or our heart feels heavy. And so humiliation has a lot of the same physical attributes as shame. The only difference is humiliation, we know that it wasn't deserved. And so if you've had a situation where somebody has really come at you with something that's been really, shaming to you, and you can step back and say, that wasn't deserved to me. That was something, either somebody got the information wrong, or that person has something going on that's making them not be who they are, or that there's something in our culture that's not allowing us to address things. So I know that's not me. So I think a story that we often hear is, the child who comes home from school and gets, a failing grade on something, or the teacher berates them. And the child comes home and says to their parents, well, I know I put a lot of work into this, and I know I did good effort, and I know that it's not perfect, but I did the best I can. That's a great example of humiliation experienced as opposed to shame. And the very fact that somebody talks about it means it's more humiliation. It can be shifted, whereas shame we often don't talk about. And the last of the 4 affective behaviors, of course, is embarrassment. Embarrassment is that funny, fleeting thing that we all feel. So I don't know, those countries that don't have things like rodeos that we have in Canada. A great example that I often think about is we have this great thing in Calgary, where I grew up, Alberta, called the Calgary Stampede. Embarrassment is coming out of the ladies' loo or the gents' loo with some toilet paper on the heel of your cowboy boot, and somebody mentions it to you, or your shirt's tucked into your skirt and it should be on the outside, and somebody mentions it to you, and you laugh in the moment, and right away it's gone. It just becomes that humorous moment, and it's not something that you take away. And as a matter of fact, you might start to share that story afterwards and say, oh, never guess what happened to me today. And so it's really important, I think, as people who do the kind of work we do in supporting others, that we understand the distinction between these, so that when we ask our clients, how are you feeling? What's going on for you right now? I'm feeling this. What are you feeling right now? We're able to tease that apart. I think another thing that's important is that we don't armor up over shame. In the research, this is what has come out of the Dare to Lead research just recently with Brene. And so as a result of those 10 organizational problems, this is how shame shows up in organizations. And I don't think we'll have time for another breakout, but what I'd like to do is just maybe have people just weigh in. So back channeling, of course, is the conversation that happens behind the meeting or in the washroom, or we talk about people, we don't talk to them. I think blame and finger pointing is pretty understood. Bullying, comparison. So when people compare people to each other, covering things up, discrimination, favoritism, gossiping, harassment. Invisible army, this is when someone says, well, everybody feels this way or everybody thinks this way. And really it's just me not feeling comfortable to be able to own my story and say, well, my experience of our meeting was X, Y, and Z, not the whole team felt this way. So we're not feeling comfortable enough to be able to own our own voice. Nostalgia I see a lot right now in clients I'm working with is, in the old days, it was so much easier. I used to like the way we did things versus having to put myself into the edge of courage by trying to learn something new. Perfectionism, I think, we all are familiar with that. I think most of us have a little bit, at least I do. When is enough enough? And, we say perfectionism is the thief of joy. Power over versus power with. Our self-worth tied to productivity. So I'm never enough. The second my feet hit the floor in the morning, I feel like I'm behind. And then the whole teasing, people pretend to be teasing out of, fun and playfulness, but under that teasing can be a very harmful and hurtful message for people. So I think let's take, 4 or 5 people, just weigh in. How do you see these kinds of shame showing up in your clients and the organizations you work with, whether it's coaching or supervision or in other types of strategic work that you do?
And I would encourage folks to use the chat room as well.
Thanks, Lily.
I think it can sometimes appear as ill health. Lots of absent days and so on and so on, and maybe just not recovering well after something that's happened and becoming ill as a result after shame or humiliation.
That's so great, Fiona. And if that's not recorded as being I'm sick because of, it just becomes an unknown stat in the history of the organization.
And it's their fault.
Yes, that person's always ill. It's got nothing to do with the context. Thank you, yeah.
I think it's cultural, because in France, it's typically opposition or revolt.
Say more about that, Michelle, please.
Well, when people are unhappy with what's going on, when they feel that they are forced to be like, then they enter into opposition.
Mm.
It's very, you can just read the newspaper with the yellow vest. It's
Yes.
exactly that, yeah.
Yes. Or what's going on in Hong Kong these days, right? When it's bad enough.
So there is probably a cultural factor in in shaming organizations.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know in Canada, there's been recently some legislation around psychological safety to make sure that people have voices. And so many organizations are being mandated to make their workplaces safer. So maybe it's a step in the right direction without it having to become, like you say, oppositional and really hard for people to work through.
Mm.
Thanks, Michelle.
I work in the Middle East, and a lot of my clients are expatriates. And so they have this fear or this shame that embraces them when they want to speak up, because potentially they can lose their job by having tough conversations. So it's a really interesting thing to talk about how they can do it in a way that is empathetic, as well as Brené says, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. But how do you do it in a way that is also safe for you when there's a possibility of you losing a job because of speaking up? So that's interesting where I am.
Absolutely, Marie. Yeah, it's such a great point. So it's easy to say and really hard to do if it means as a result I've lost my livelihood.
And also it can be suicide, psychosomatic disease, things like that at the extreme.
Absolutely.
And I see that in India as a culture, I see perfectionism and self-worth tied to productivity is very, very common. I'm noticing that as a trend in most of the leaders, because that's how they have been always groomed to be ahead and take the promotions, and so they are so ahead in their journey that they don't want to look back and analyze. It's almost a sense of denial, which is connected to low self-esteem and self-worth.
Wow, interesting, Jaya. That's so interesting to think about how shame shows up across so many different cultures. And if we don't stop and savor one promotion or one goal in that climbing of the mountain in our careers, I think at some point it's going to be a burnout or something at some place, right? Because people can't, there's no resilience left because they're always on, never take time to be off.
I was just going to pick up on that point on resilience. In the health service in England, there's been a lot of emphasis on coaching in organisations to increase resilience of staff. And there's now beginning to be a realisation that you can't just keep trying to make the people more resilient when they're living in a culture and a climate that costs so much in the way that we've all been talking.
Thanks, Sylvia. So I'm hearing we've got to get at the root cause, not just keep throwing, training or tips and techniques to people. And of course, we say in the resilience work, when somebody's falling out of their aircraft and their parachute doesn't open, is not the time to give them resilience. You've got to build that in advance so that people can say, hey, when this happens, I need to have this boundary. We do some work here, Lily and I, in the healthcare field as well. And I think one of the number one things is people don't know how to have these conversations, especially in a strongly unionized environment. Like you said, Marie, it's easy to lose your job, or it's hard to get, traction. And of course, people in healthcare usually are there because they really care an awful lot. So they're prime candidates to be, hard on themselves to start with, right? Maybe time for one more.
And you've got lots of stuff in the chat line too.
Oh, I'm not going to open chat, Lily. Could you just tell me a few? Because I don't want to lose the connection to the slides.
Right, so there's a lot going on here. What's the difference between bullying and teasing? I hear invisible army a lot in one company, taking too much responsibility, feeling they have to fix it. No one taking risks, offering anything in meetings. Working with a client whose entrepreneurial business is bottom line driven. Feels frustrated that it's not recognized for innovation. Self-worth tied to bottom line. perfectionism and a no-fail requirement. Back channeling is something in a previous organization. A supervisor called it drive-bys. Sometimes the shame shows up when organization members see external experts as having the answers and not honoring what they know themselves. According to WHO, 2020, depression will be the #1 factor for people to be away from their jobs. Inability to deal with these factors is closely linked with burnout and depression. Bringing in innovation experts and running innovation classroom days and going back to the desk the next day and nothing changes. Culture awareness and sensitivity. Emphasis on productivity is another common sign. Little concern for how results are achieved and the cost to human beings. Bonus related to targets, not connected to team player or humanness. More limited way in the group discussed how you know what the ground is that you're attempting to that your attempt to be honest and vulnerable lands on. What's the potential consequence of misjudging that? Struck by how unproductive organizations are when these behaviors are prevalent. Lots of, I'm going to lose my job because I'm not so skilled as millenniums. Thinking about the role of personnel or department competitions around variations of productivity. Getting to the root is critical. Collective shame as well as individual shame. Susan Scott, fierce conversations. Boss expecting many times, it's one reason they feel. The boss expectations many times, it's one of the reasons they feel that way. There's an intersection here with paradox of choice and learned helplessness research. First world problems. Don't feel the way to accomplish the boss or company expectations. Use of political wording is also a way to disconnect the results and the demands. Having managers who often travel, economy, transcontinental, and call it adjustment of costs.
Wow, thanks, Lily. Such a rich chat line. Thank you, everyone. I think going back to that first question, the difference between teasing and bullying is such a great one. I don't have the answer. I would think that teasing is more subtle and bullying is larger. It's more direct. You see, it's more, has probably a huge impact. Perhaps teasing is the on-ramp to bullying, which is further down. I don't know. Does somebody in the group has probably got a lot more knowledge in that area?
Is it something to do with the intent rather than content?
Intent, yes. That's a great point.
Sometimes I think that teasing often has, I think of it more like passive aggression because it has that, you can use humor and it can mask an underlying ill intent, but also it can tap into someone's vulnerability even if it is well-intentioned, where bullying, as you said, is more, it's more directly aggressive.
Right. It can be almost like the rebel child in TA, versus the, yeah. Thank you, Janet. Okay, thanks, Lily, for reading all those wonderful chats. I'd like to just move on to the, another piece I think is really important is how we armor up against shame. So if we work in a culture, our clients work in a culture where shame is prevalent, we put on shields, and a shield is a metaphor for I'm going to put up something so you can't get in and hurt me. And so, and vulnerability in this work is often misunderstood. We define vulnerability not as we want soldiers' guns to work well. We want physicians to know how to, operate on our hearts. We're not talking vulnerability with systems. In all this work, which I think is sometimes misunderstood, we say vulnerability is the courage to have the interpersonal conversations, the things that cannot be perfected. So we want, as much as we can, perfect operations and surgeries. We want perfect bridges that don't fall down, perfect airplanes that mostly take off. So we're not talking about those systems. We're talking about the interpersonal dynamics where people feel most vulnerable. And of course, the number one myth in vulnerability is it looks like a strength in you, but it feels like a weakness in me. And the paradox is it's the first thing I look for in you, and it's the last thing I want to show you if we don't have trust together. So shame shields are a way of us armoring up and saying, okay, I'm going to go into this place that's not safe for me for all the reasons we just looked at, and there's lots of termites in the walls. And so there are three ways. The moving away shield means withdrawing, hiding, silencing ourselves, and keeping secrets. I often think of this, for those who like animals, it's like the bunny rabbit running away. Okay, I'm just going to get out of here. The moving towards is seeking to appease or please. So that's like the puppy dog. It's like, I'll just do whatever I can to make it okay, and I'll move towards you. And then the moving against is where basically shame meets shame, and trying to gain power over others, being aggressive, using shame to fight shame. And it's almost like, you know, the lion that sort of tries to eat somebody. And so probably if you're like me, I can recognize I use these shields at different times with different situations. In one conversation, I might start with one way and then find myself cycling into the second shield and then ending with the third shield. So I think it's really interesting when I'm working with my clients to have them think about, you know, which shield comes up for them when, and what does that tell them about the context and the culture that they're working in, and how is that feeding into their shame, because all of these are silencing our voices and stopping us from playing big. I think it was pretty well known in Brené's research that, you know, the biggest shame trigger for men is to be perceived as weak or incompetent. That's been around for quite a while. And that the biggest shame trigger for women is, of course, not to be perfect. And that, you know, how we look, you know, no muffin tops, no wrinkles, no gray hair, you know, just to look perfect in how our body image, to look perfect in, you know, how we parent and how we're a spouse, you know, how we show up in the workplace. Interestingly, in her new research, the shame trigger for the general workplace, so taking gender aside, is the fear of irrelevance. And I think this is really important when you think about, you know, what's going on as, you know, our generational shifts are happening, technology and AI taking over, you know, the kinds of things we're seeing going on in the workplaces all across the world as people are, you know, shifting how they do work and how our clients are needing different things. And so I think I like the fact that it's taken away some of that gender piece, because I think for most people, let me just ask, how many people have a fear of being irrelevant? That you're not good enough, that your skills are not up to date, that, you know, other people will get, you know, grow past you, move past you, that you're not enough. And I think it's huge. And of course, in our work, we can see the wonderful connection here with the Cartman drama triangle. You know, again, I picked this up from Karen Pratt at the GSN call last week. You know, so we start to see that, you know, rescuers, of course, are feeling overly responsible for people, does more than 50% of the thinking for others, and discounts others' own power. So we could see that the moving toward could be a form of overdone, you know, moving toward could be a form of rescuing people. Similarly, you know, the victim, as you know, feels helpless, discounts self and resources, is either looking for a persecutor or a rescuer to help them move forward, and does less than 50% of the work. And you can see how this could show up as the victim would be the moving away shield. Okay, I'm just going to step back here. I'm in shame. I don't think I'm enough. Somebody else knows more than I do, so I'm not going to move forward on this situation. And of course, the persecutor, who believes that they have power over and can make other people do things and comes from a place of superiority, discounts others' feelings, value, and dignity, would be the moving against. So we can see that a nice intersection here in the work that Brené quotes. The shame shields comes from the work of Linda Hartling at the Stone Center in Wellesley, but there are many others who've talked about these three ways that we can armor up. And of course, for courage to be contagious, we need to figure out how to scale this in organizations so that the shame is met with healthy alternatives. And I think, like you say, getting to root cause, giving people some skills, having, you know, it starts one person, one conversation at a time, where we're able to build this trust and have the different kinds of conversations. And the last piece I want to share with you, because I know we're getting close to time, is this armored versus daring leadership, which I think is a really helpful way to look at, you know, again, it's not fear that gets in the way of courage, it's our armor. So whether we're shielding or carrying around this 20-pound piece of armor over our heart to say, I just got beat up in that meeting, or I don't feel good in my call that I've just had, so I'm just going to armor up the next time I'm in that meeting with that person. And in the research, there's lots of different ways that Brené talks about. Here's a couple of examples I thought were interesting for us. So armored leadership. And it's not like all the left column is bad and all the right column is good, but the idea is that these are kind of paradoxes that we can move back and forth between. So when perfectionism is driving, it fosters a fear of culture, which is a way of armoring up, because I don't want to be vulnerable, I don't want to be called out, versus daring leadership, which is modeling and encouraging healthy striving. And we say in this work, healthy striving is when I set a goal from inside. Perfectionism is when I'm trying to be perfect for an external validation of who I am. And so we say healthy striving is important. There's nothing wrong with having a great goal. Empathy and self-compassion play a part of this kind of daring leadership. Moving from working with scarcity and squandering, so there's not enough resources, there's not enough time, there's no joy and recognition. Like you said, Lily, in some of your comments, that people show up in kind of cultures where they're not showing up at all, versus practicing gratitude and celebrating milestones and victories with people and saying, hey, we still have a ways to go, we're working it. Numbing, which Brene calls as an epidemic, versus setting boundaries, using power over versus power with, hustling for our worth versus knowing what your value is, leading for compliance and control versus cultivating commitment and shared purpose. So I guess my final slide here, just to close this up, because I know Lily and Damien probably have some notes. This is where, the newest research is this area of, the 4 skill sets of courage that Brene talks about, which is, these are 4 learnable skill sets that leaders can have. This is the rollout of the Dare to Lead work, which is we need to rumble with vulnerability, learn skills around that, learn how to live into our values, braving trust, which is about having the courageous conversations, and learning to rise after a fall. So with that, I just have a little slide. I'm going to pass it back to Lily because I think we're almost out of time.
Wow, that was great, Laurie. Thank you so much. Lots to think about, and you certainly provoked some thinking in the chat room and with others as well. This bullying versus teasing seems to have some energy behind it, and the shame, humiliation, guilt, and embarrassment, those seem to be kind of touch points. If you could stop sharing, that would be great. And if you would if you'd like to be contacted, if you put your contact information in the chat line, that would be great for everyone. If you want, that's a choice. So thank you so much. So lots of great comments in the chat line too that you can have a look at, and thanks and appreciations. So 47 people on this call. That was a record too, Laurie. One of the records.
No, you're welcome. Thank you all for showing up. I'm not an expert. I'm a learner as well as everybody is. And yes, I will definitely share the slides. Absolutely.
Okay. So I'm just mindful of time. We should have a couple of quick announcements before we close. It would be nice to get some comments, but if you want to add some comments, please put them into the chat line and we'll save them all and send them to Laurie. Next month, September 16th, Larissa will be doing a webinar on trauma and how it's related to supervision. October 14th, Terry Hildebrandt on marketing supervision. Ethical Issues on November 18th by Case. And December 16th, Resistance to Supervision. Those are what's coming up. We have a website and a LinkedIn. If you want access, please go ahead and send me an email and I'll give you access. Mexico City, May 7th and 8th, call for submissions to our next conference. That's up on the website as well. And Damien, do you have something else? Registry. So if you want to put your, sorry, go ahead.
No, I see that many people are sending their emails, but we are not, the email that we need are the one from people who are not in our database. So if this is your first time joining the network and you want to receive our emails, is when we need your email in the chat room so we can include you in the list. For everybody who received the mails, you don't need to put your email because we are not going to be sending person by person the slides. What we're going to do, we're going to be posting them in the website. So in that way you can access all of the materials, all of the recordings, all of the material that we use in these network meetings. Everything will be posted in the website. And I just also put the link. I don't know if people got a chance to look at it. If you want to get in the registry, we already have 3 people like Marilyn, Michelle, Francine, who are already part of the registry. If you want to be part of the registry, you need to download the form and send it to us with your picture so you can be included. These are the announcements. And also the call for proposals. That's an important one.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so if you want to present at the next conference, the call for submissions is on the website. So, and I will send it out separately later today. So thank you everyone for your attendance and your active participation. It was a great call. Lots of information for us to think about. This is the arena that we work in supervision, isn't it? A big piece of it. All right, so we'll see you all September 16th. Hope you can
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Great work,
Bye-bye.
Lori.
Thank you.
Great session.
Good work.
Thank you, Lori.
Thank you.
Thanks,
My
Lori.
pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.